by the enemy, which would produce default discipleship. Now, I had to think about that because, see, that's what's happening in my life from time to time. I'm a default disciple. When I'm trying to look at things and I don't like the way things are turning out, and so I'm trying to look at everything in a default mentality. This would produce a life of ambiguity, saying one thing but being another that is stated at the same time, which is demonstrated in the person's actions. Default discipleship is when you say one thing, but then you live something else altogether different, as a contradiction. We do that all the time, and we try to justify it because we don't think anybody sees it. Jesus sees it. He sees it and he says, hey, what's this? Default discipleship. The pattern, if not corrected, translate into us switching tracks. You know, when a train is on a beeline and it has to make a certain turn at a certain time to get to a certain destination, and you got a switcher. And when there's various trains coming through this switcher complex, that's what caused a lot of trains to wreck like that. Somebody's on their cell phone talking when they should be looking at that computer chart and know that number 1 is coming and number 3 is coming in the same direction, and it's time to switch them tracks. And he's on the cell phone talking with his lover while the trains are coming, and he said, oh, baby, that's right, yeah. And he forgets to look down, and the train is coming, and boom. Well, that's just what will happen in our lives once we do this. We switch tracks in the midst of our Christianity. Jesus knew that's what Peter did. Whatever the pattern is caught, one has to provide a cover-up because there's no more productive material to test. Once that train wrecks, everybody know what happened. Man, you can switch tracks. So Jesus was telling Peter, Peter, you're about to switch tracks. Why do you think the Christian church is so devoid of this kind of thing? Because they don't hear messages like this. The whole blooming church is switching tracks in the midst, Mark, of our lives. We're switching and going that way. And then when you go to these other things called churches, and they're giving you these 5 steps to life's happiness. What you ought to do is show 2 trains when they collide. And then say, now how did that happen? And that's what happens in our lives. Oh, this is a beautiful thing once you look at this thing. All of the tests will fail us. Hey, go to Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. Okay, this is Paul. The Apostle Paul addressing the same guy, Peter. I don't know whether you ever knew this, but Peter was an apostle and Paul was an apostle. And Peter could have said, well, I'm the big shot apostle. I'm cool because I repented after I cussed out Jesus at the fireball. Years had passed. Church in Asia Minor is growing. Peter was being called out to help upgrade the church. But Peter was playing the hypocrite. Now let's look at this very closely. Verse 11. But when Cephas, that's another name for Peter. But when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face. This is the Apostle Paul speaking in the first person in Galatians chapter 2. He said the famous Apostle Peter came to Antioch talking trash, and Paul said, I stood him up and said, you hypocrite! We know what you did at the fire. Now you doing it all over again. See, my friends, you may think it's gone, but it's not. He said, but I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. Here's one apostle is saying to another apostle, you are condemnable. He says, for prior to the coming of certain men from James, in other words, James, the big preacher in Jerusalem, he was a head preacher, and Peter, see, you have to understand, Peter was in Antioch where Gentile Christians were. And so when James' boys came from Jerusalem, you know, Peter was down there in Antioch eating pork chops. He was down there doing the cultural mix. He was down there loving what the Gentiles love, living and being a Christian, but enjoying that freedom. But then when some of the brothers came in from Jerusalem, look what he did. he says, James, because he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he began to withdraw and hold himself aloof, fearing the party of the circumcision. Because he knew that certain circumcised Christians were there, and they would say, Peter, what you doing eating with them Negroes? What you doing eating with them? We don't eat what they eat. We eat kosher. And Peter started going, well, that's right. That's right. I don't like that stuff. You lying. You love it. He was loving eating with the brothers. Now look what happened. Look what happened. And the rest of the Jews joined him in his hypocrisy. In other words, this hypocrite carried a whole group of people with him. Peter, the blessed apostle. See, now, if Jesus caught him before he went to Calvary, he was trying to warn him years ago. Now Peter saved many years, and that hocus pocus rigmarole is doing the same thing. See, you can be manipulated after you save. Don't you think because you saved, you won't be manipulated. Look at that. And the other Jews joined him in the hypocrisy, with the result that even Barnabas was carried away with this hypocrisy. In other words, Barnabas, who was a dude that was financing all of these trips going around, he was eating with the Gentiles, and then when the Jews came in, Barnabas started acting like, I don't eat that kind of food. All of them was playing the hypocrite. But look at verse 14. He said, but when I saw that they were not straightforward. See, this is Paul. See, Paul had said, look, man, I'm going to lose my head anyhow. I ain't thinking about none of them. This is what I love about the Bible, because the Bible gives me insight. All right, you see, John, they ain't straightforward. What you going to do? Tell them they ain't straightforward. So you ain't straightforward. You a Christian? Right. You a hypocrite. Because this is what it says. You gonna do it? No, you don't understand my plight. I ain't thinking about your stupid plight. You gonna do this? Paul said, when they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, that is Peter, in the presence of all. In other words, he didn't take him in no back room with the elders. He stood up in the front of the congregation. Say, look at this hypocrite over here trying to eat some kosher meat when he really wants a pork chop. Paul probably said, bring me that pork chop. I'll eat it. Forget those of the circumcision. He said, if you being a Jew live like the Gentiles and not like the Jews, how is it that you compel the Gentiles to live like the Jews? You see, man, what kind of hypocrisy is this? You done did the flip switch on here. You went to default Christianity. That's where the church is today. And so we see the manipulation of Satan still working in this very talented Christian man years after he's saved, baptized, filled with the Holy Spirit. He was the one that brought salvation to Cornelius' house in Joppa. And look at him playing the hypocrite. And Paul said, I checked him on it. There will be times when you will see Christians around you doing the craziest things. All you're supposed to do is say, y'all being hypocritical. What? And you know you're being hypocritical. With me, all they got to do is look in my face. I just look at him and say, look, I got to go. I ain't preaching to nobody no more. I got to go. That's it. Don't try to re-preach to somebody that's heard you preach. Because they got it. It's already in there. Hook, line, and sinker. Fixed. Let's keep looking at this. This is so, so beautiful. Once we look at this. Thus we learn that Peter did not learn the lesson right away. Peter didn't learn the lesson when Jesus gave it to him in Matthew 16. He barely learned it altogether. If Paul had to come to him years after he was an apostle. Now what you think about us? God got a way of showing me something. And this is what gives me solace, Liz. This is what gives me solace. Because I'm telling you, you know what? Hey, if he didn't learn it, people around me ain't going to learn it either. So let me keep moving. We also note that the Lord is patient with those